This is joint work with colleagues at the Southampton University School of Education, Tony Kelly and Christian Bokov, on learning inequalities during the pandemic. And I'm going to present the longitudinal follow-up results, including the 2 school closures, of a study on learning inequality, which we started during the first school closure. This new project received funding in record times from the UK Economic and Social Research Council with the COVID emergency route, and received great support, which I gratefully acknowledge, from many people at the University of Southampton, Public Policy at Southampton, the School of Education, the UK Data Service, and colleagues at the University of Essex, including Professor Rabe. I cannot name them all, but without them, the research grant application would not have been written, the project would not have been completed. Missing schools has negative consequences on children's learning. This notion is upheld by practice and policy. Indeed, it is not considered acceptable to miss schools, and good reasons must be provided for not attending school. The notion matches our intuition. Parents generally believe that attending schools improve academic achievement, and the picture on the left naturally causes negative feelings and discomfort. And the notion is confirmed by evidence. We know that children learn better when they interact with peers and teachers in schools. Indeed, in line with these notions, closing schools in 2020 was considered as an extreme necessity, and policy should intervene with equally extreme measures and resources to counteract the detrimental effects of missing schools. When schools closed due to COVID in March 2020, schools were not prepared to transition to remote learning. Nothing similar has ever happened before, and the school closure lasted for an extended period of 15 weeks. Students transitioned to distance learning again in January 2021 for another 6 weeks, impairing an already difficult learning recovery. It is certain that the school closures had severe effects on children's learning, and that children from disadvantaged backgrounds had the largest losses. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds are less likely to have a computer at home, are less likely to have parents at home during the lockdown because their parents' jobs is less amenable to home working, and their parents are less able to support their children academically. The topic of learning loss and learning inequality during the pandemic received a lot of attention from the media. So on the right is the article in The Guardian that featured our research, which is one of the more than 100 national and regional outlets that featured our findings. And at the bottom is the project webpage hosted by Public Policy at Southampton University. Evidence on the first UK school closure, to which we have contributed, show that students spend fewer hours doing schoolwork than they would normally do. Most of the schoolwork consisted of offline activities rather than live sessions, and there were marked inequalities in the uptake of schoolwork between high socioeconomic status and low socioeconomic status students, deprived and non-deprived schools, children with access to computers and study space, and students with no such resources. There is, however, limited evidence on the second school closure, and our study contributes to this research by looking at schoolwork during both school closure periods. The notion that missing schools has detrimental effects is supported by research. Losing hours of school has negative effects on students' cognitive abilities, national exam results, finishing upper secondary, entering university, finding a job, future earnings, health, and health of young people, and the life prospects of their children. It is not easy to find evidence to support this hypothesis, because up to now schools have never closed, and therefore we don't know what happens when children do not attend schools. Previous research, however, has found some smart ways of estimating the effect of losing schools by looking at situations when children do not attend school, such as summer vacation, during which children forget what they learned and lose months of progress. Another way of looking at the issue is to analyze teachers' strikes, which are associated with reduced earnings in Argentina. Other research look at the variation in the amount of schooling received in Sweden and Germany, showing a positive association between the weeks of schooling and achievements. Quite conveniently, in the Netherlands, standardized national learning tests in primary schools are held twice a year, and in 2020, the tests occurred exactly before and after the school closure, which lasted 8 weeks, starting in March. They found that the school closure was associated with a reduction in scores on math, spelling, and reading tests by 3 percentage points, roughly 8% of a standard deviation, which is a substantial effect amounting to an attainment loss that would occur with a 20% reduction in the duration of the school year. The test score reduction was larger for children from lower educated families. The Netherlands are an interesting case because it's one of the countries with the highest use of broadband and where the government and the local administrations have paid great attention to the computerization of schools. School closures were one of the shortest. And so if in the Netherlands, which we observe those negative, relatively large effects, what could happen in countries which are not as prepared? Research shows that remedying the potential learning loss is possible. Goodman confirmed that students' absences have strong detrimental effects on children's achievements, but the lost learning time due to school closure because of extreme snowfall in Massachusetts has no impact on achievement. Possibly this is because teachers can better manage teaching during and after coordinated school closures, but deal less well with absences that affect only some students. Following the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2005, children were displaced to other states for the rest of the school year, and Sacerdote found that a large decline of math scores in the first year following the hurricanes, which was followed by a quick recovery. One possible explanation is that schools in New Orleans were so deficient and poor that evacuees benefited from leaving the original schools. So what do? We use data from Understanding Society, UK household longitudinal study, obviously, that collected data on learning during both school closures. The data are representative, rich, and high quality, and rely on the long history of the study. In this project, we are interested in analyzing whether and to what extent the prevalence of schoolwork changed between the first and the second school closure periods, whether and to what extent the gap in schoolwork between the least disadvantaged and the most disadvantaged families changed between the first and the second school closure period. The advantage of using these data is that we have detailed measures on learning for both school closures, including online, synchronous, and offline asynchronous lessons, hours of schoolwork, support from parents, availability of computers, and we can link those measures to measures of socioeconomic circumstances from the annual survey, which include the occupation of the parents, working patterns, family structure. We consider the household structure of the data, where information is available for multiple children within the household using mixed models. We check the robustness of the results using interval regression and different sample selections. Whilst most schools in April 2020 provided offline lessons, most schools did not provide online lessons because they were not prepared to do so. Only 40% of students in primary and 42% in secondary received online lessons. The percentage increased to 78% in primary and 92% in secondary during the second school closure in January 2021, showing that schools were better prepared during the second school closure. The hours of schoolwork went up from 2.3 to 3.3 in primary and from 2.6 to 4 in secondary. A big increase, especially for secondary students. That is good news. In total, primary students were offered 2.6 lessons per day in April 2020 and 3.6 in January 2021. And secondary students were offered 3.3 lessons per day in April 2020 and 3.5 in January 2021. Computers are essential during the remote learning, and the majority of students had one during the school closures, either their own computer or a shared one. As expected, secondary students were more likely to have their own computers rather than a shared one than primary pupils. The most notable change between the two school closures was the increasing proportion of students having their own computer, which suggests that students were better able to take lessons during the second school closure. It is helpful for students to have an adult around during remote learning because children, especially young ones, need guidance, pressure, assistance with IT resources. It is intuitive that students of parents who work from home, who are likely to have a professional job, have an advantage in this respect compared to students of parents who cannot work from home, who are likely to have a non-professional job. Roughly half of the main parents worked from home, and this proportion remained quite stable during the two school closures. Therefore, changes in the uptake of schoolwork are not accounted for by changes in the working patterns. It is important to look at the combination of the relevant family circumstances. Upper-class families are an abstract concept. They are not observable. A less abstract concept is upper-class families with or without a computer, where parents work from home or not. It is important to look at those factors together because upper-class parents, or service class, as we call them, are more likely to work from home and provide their children with a computer. If we look at these combinations, we observe that differences due to social class are magnified when combined with other factors. In April 2020, children in the least disadvantaged families where both parents worked regularly from home, where the main parent was in a service class occupation, and where the children had their own computer, were found to spend on average 24 minutes more per day on schoolwork in primary schools and 48 minutes more in secondary schools than more disadvantaged children who live in families where the main parent was in a routine class occupation, the child had to share a computer, and either parent did not work regularly from home. Children who live with a single parent are particularly disadvantaged. Children who live with a single parent, for example, in an intermediate class, who worked from home spend 42 fewer minutes per day on schoolwork in primary schools and 36 fewer minutes on schoolwork per day in secondary schools. We can now address the original research questions regarding the change in the inequality between socioeconomic groups between the two school closures. Moving to January 2021, the gaps between the groups did not change for the majority of groups. In detail, primary school children of single parents who work from home were able to reduce the gap in schoolwork compared to the most advantaged socioeconomic group. But generally, inequalities between socioeconomic groups in the uptake of schoolwork remain stable between the two school closure periods, despite the improved provision of remote learning. How do we explain the improvement in the provision of schoolwork? In primary schools, we explain it with the higher availability of computers, but mostly with increased provision of offline and online lessons and families' behavior, meaning that families were better prepared to engage with schoolwork during the second school closure. In secondary schools, the increase in the provision of lessons is still the main factor explaining the change. The increased availability of computers now contributes more substantially to the positive outcome, and again, improvement can be attributed also to the changing behavior of families, better strategies, preparation, and commitment. To summarize the results, we found that compared to the first school closure period, the second closure showed an improved provision of schoolwork in both primary and secondary schools. The number of offline and online lessons per day increased between the two school closure periods, and this led to a larger volume of schoolwork. The influence of parental background, of parental occupation, on the hours of schoolwork completed is substantial and is magnified by access to computers and working patterns. Children of single parents who worked from home were able to reduce the gap in primary school when compared to the most advantaged socioeconomic group, but overall inequalities between socioeconomic groups remained stable between the two closures. Whilst inequalities between socioeconomic groups adapted for schoolwork have remained generally stable, better school provision, better availability of computers, and better family engagement with schoolwork contributed to an improvement in the total hours of schoolwork completed. It is vital that schools remain open during any phases of high infection of these and future pandemics, if at all possible, in order to avoid losing years of academic progress and further widening the achievement gap between socioeconomic groups. Should schools be forced to close again in the event of another lockdown, inequalities in learning can be remediated by increasing the provision of lessons, providing students with better access to IT, by providing academic tutors to compensate for the absence of parents who cannot work from home. The traditional proxy measure of socioeconomic disadvantage in education is entitlement to free school meals. Our research shows that this measure is too crude in the current pandemic. Our research shows that when providing schoolwork remotely during a school closure, schools should consider providing guidance and tutoring targeted at children who do not have a computer or do not have ready access to one, children of single parents, and children of routine class parents who cannot work from home. The government catch-up funding and schemes like the National Tutoring Program are a timely response and a laudable effort at closing the attainment gap between socioeconomic groups. From a quantitative point of view, the total allocation per pupil is smaller compared to more ambitious catch-up plans in the Netherlands and the UAE and the US, for example. And qualitatively, it is important to target online and offline resources, tutoring, IT hardware to those students which our research has identified as being in greatest need. To do otherwise is to risk piling disadvantage upon disadvantage from which it would be very difficult to recover. Scaling up the national tutoring program and identifying those groups of students has been a challenge so far. Schools are in the best position to identify those students and families most in need and should be provided with the necessary funding and flexibility to target provision and support the most disadvantaged students. And I stop here.